Hello and welcome back to the KCC channel. I'm Rob and I hope you are having a wonderful day today. Today, we're jumping into some malicious compliance. Our first story today comes to us from Hadak Ura. I was told to do what an exec told me in a precast concrete plant. Let's jump right in. Some background first, I worked for a precast concrete company as a job in between high school and college. The job sucked, but it paid well. We made a lot of the massive storm culverts and tunnel pieces that are dropped in place during construction instead of being made where they are. To put this in perspective, our largest casting form could handle pieces 40 feet by 30 feet. Absolutely massive pieces. After a few weeks of working for this company, I was trained to run the industrial concrete mixer and did this every day. This mixer was 3 stories tall, mixed up to 4.5 cubic yards of concrete at a time, and was the most beat up machine in the entire plant, which was saying something. It ran 6 days a week, 2 shifts a day, and was never maintained because the company couldn't get the techs to come out on Sunday, its only day not running, and didn't want to lose a work shift to get it maintained. The only good thing about it was that all the materials were weighed and fed in automatically. All it took was a button to start the process. The most common problem was the bottom release door not sealing correctly. It would be just barely cracked, allowing all the water to run out of it, resulting in an unusable chunky mess that would need to be dumped in a scrap hole instead of being used. If this happened, the mess needed to be dumped out of the mixer quickly before it could partially harden inside the mixer. This only happened once that I was there, and it took an entire shift to chisel the stuff out. We put a mark into the sliding door to show where it should be versus where it would be when it didn't seal. The process worked like this. A cage of rebar and anchor points was constructed on a base, around a core, and a form bolted around it. The QA guy signed off, and the form was then filled with concrete and left to cure. The curing time largely depends on the ambient temperature. The hotter it is, the faster it cures, and vice versa. Once the piece is cured enough to be lifted, the form is stripped and the piece lifted by crane off the core. Repeat until you have as many pieces ordered. Another thing to note is hard hat colors. They were color coded according to your role. Blue are plant supervisors, green QA, red the foreman, etc. For the normal workers, there was a choice of 2 colors. Yellow for people who don't know what they're doing, typically new or dumb people, and gray for those that do. This was about 5 months into my time with them, and I had just got a gray one maybe 2 months before. On to the story. Our plant was starting to produce pieces at a substantially slower rate than the other plant owned by the company. We were working 10 to 12 hour days every day to try and make up the difference. Typically, multiple pieces were made per form per day, 2 to 4. We were only managing 1 and maybe 2 per form per day. To figure out the reason for this, the owner's plan was to send an exec from the main office to observe and time every section of the process in our plant. This in itself was silly. Remember how I said the speed concrete cures is based on temperature? Our plant was in an unheated warehouse in a state bordering Canada in the winter. The other plant was in Florida. Can you guess why production was a bit slower in our plant? In any case, during the shift meeting before the exec got there, our foreman's exact words were, "Do what he tells you, otherwise stay the F away from him." Wonderful. The shift proceeds as normal, building cages and forms get bolted. Maybe 6 hours into the shift, I climb up on top of a mixer to the platform, and I am greeted by the exec in the shiniest white hard hat I had ever seen, and office attire complete with black dress shoes. In a concrete plant. Laugh out loud. He looked bored out of his mind. He asked me something to the effect of if I was looking forward to the end of the shift in 2 hours. I told him that with no problems, we might get to leave in 4 hours. He got the most defeated look on his face and mumbled something that I didn't catch. I went through the pre-checks on the mixer and found the bottom door was once again not closing properly. I yelled down to the plant supervisor that the door wasn't sealing again and that the machine would be down until I got it to seal, normally by chipping the concrete left by the previous shift after using the mixer away from the opening. The plant supervisor yelled back a few choice expletives directed at the mixer and stormed into his office. The exec had a look and said he thought the door looked fine. I told him that it did this a lot and that it wasn't sealed, pointed out the mark to him, and went to get the tool I bribed a fabricator with energy drinks to make me to chip away the concrete. A braking bar welded onto a rebar shaft that I kept under the mixer itself. No more hunting down an air gun and going through the confined space lock and tagouts. Just stand on top and poke at the concrete until the door moves freely. Upon coming back with the tool, the exec told me that the seal was fine and to run it. I pointed out the same things about the door not sealing regularly. I asked if they were sure. They replied in the affirmative. I started up the mixer. The mixer regularly threw a bunch of silica up into the air. With the water draining out the bottom, this was going to get extra dusty. I offered them an extra mask that I had, and they replied that they would be fine. Well, it's not my lungs. At the same time, I noticed the plant's heavy equipment guy walking into the building and got his attention and made the hand gesture for the front loader. I got a WTF look from them, and they mouthed, "Why?" I pointed down at the mixer, repeated the gesture, and they threw up their hands and turned around. The load went into the mixer. Water started draining out the bottom. Dust goes everywhere. Go figure. The plant supervisor comes out of the office, I assume after seeing the giant cloud on the cameras, runs over and says something like, "OP, what the F are you doing?" The mixer is quite loud with concrete in it. I got the general gist though. I just pointed to the exec, who was now covered in dust and staring at the water pouring out the bottom of the mixer, never said a word. The plant supervisor's head swiveled, and he just crooked a finger at the exec. The exec climbed down. They exited the building with the plant supervisor leading. The fallout. The front loader was able to get to the mixer before the mess was able to partially cure inside it. So the cleanup was as easy as dumping it into the bucket and then dumping that in the scrap hole and spraying out the mixer. We continued the shift after I chipped the concrete away from the door and got it closing properly again. Not too much time wasted, maybe an hour. The foreman asked what happened later in the shift and didn't stop laughing for the rest of it. The plant supervisor talked to me afterwards, asked what happened, and told me he didn't blame me for that dumb butt's mistakes, since he had said to do what the exec said. I never saw the exec again, and the plant supervisor never said what happened in the parking lot. I can only assume that the most this produced was angry phone calls and a lot of concrete wasted. I left about 3 months later, but I never heard anything else about slow production times from the main office. I've said it for previous stories and I'm gonna say it here again, but how do you effectively manage people and make decisions for what they're doing when you've never done their job before? Because of course, that executive makes more money and is so much smarter than all the people that have been using that equipment for years and years, right? Do me a quick favor, have a look down below the video. If that subscribe button's still red, it means you're not actually subscribed to the KCC channel. Please hit that subscribe button for more daily Reddit stories. Our next story today comes to us from Absurdity18. You must call if you are sick, no exceptions. Let's jump right in. Our department management, in their infinite wisdom, introduced a new rule that if you were sick, you had to call and speak to your TL at least 3 hours before your shift started. No exceptions. Ever. Such was their intelligence, they announced this new super well thought out rule in one of their email blasts containing so much drivel that no one ever actually read them. They were akin to internal spam, and we joked amongst ourselves that if the company's spam filters were any good, like our marketing team spins them to be, they'd get blocked. I'll admit, ignorance is no excuse, but I was definitely one of those people who ignored these emails, so I had no idea about the rule until a few days later when I had woken up feeling unwell. Now, my shifts that week started at 6 a.m., which meant I usually woke around 4:30 a.m., so once I knew I was too unwell, I sent a "sorry, but I'm unwell today, etc." email to my TL. I should mention here that prior to this new rule, an email was perfectly okay, though there was never a firm rule about a method, just as long as it was reasonable notice. On the few occasions I'd had to call off sick before, never for a 6 a.m. start, I'd always made a phone call, an expectation from previous jobs, which I've always carried with me. This one time though, I figured, hey, it's 4:30 a.m., an email would be better received by my TL than waking up at stupid o'clock. Nope, wrong. Turns out my 4:30 a.m. email wasn't good enough, and I got my butt hauled into a meeting with HR and my TL when I was back at work the next day. Of course, I accepted that I didn't read the email with the new rule, my bad, but when I tried to put forward my point about the unreasonable time to call, I was told it was absolutely no excuse, that I should have been more responsible and called on time, that I was not being asked for my opinion on rules or policies, and that I had to follow them to the letter, or else I'd face a formal warning, etc. They weren't going to budge, and I wasn't going to make this my hill to die on, so I let them have their moment, and afterwards went back to my desk. I joked with a few colleagues that I would just set an extra alarm for 2:50 a.m. from then on, just in case. But knuckles now red from their slapping and butt now sore from their kicking, I figured I really would play HR's game if that's what they wanted. I figured if I felt sick, I'd call in by 3 a.m. Else, I'd go back to sleep and wake up at my usual time. Stupid, yes, but that's the rules. A few days later, I woke up to my first alarm feeling unwell again and knew I wasn't going to be fit for work come my scheduled start at 6 a.m. I certainly wouldn't admit to being happy and certainly wasn't uncontrollably smiling as I picked up my phone, called up my TL, and waited for an answer. Didn't get her the first time, surprise, surprise, so I figured I'd call again, just to be sure. This time I got lucky and heard a groggy hello on the other end. I gave the formalities, told her I was off sick again, and hung up. I could tell she was positively thrilled to be woken so early, but hey, it's what they wanted. The next day, I was fine and was back at work without drama, but the next day, a stomach bug hit the office and my entire team, TL included, all rostered on for 6 a.m. starts that week, ended up leaving early. I'm sure you can paint the rest of this picture. Cue 2 days of 3 a.m. phone calls from every one of the 10 people in my team. Cue my TL getting more pissed with each one. Cue HR adding a small bit to the next week's usual drivel mail. I was sure to read this one, not rescinding the rule, but instead patting themselves on the back for coming up with the addition of sending a short email to your TL is now also a suitable form of advising illness. Such intelligence. I worked there for another 4 months before moving on to much greener pastures and was sick only a few more occasions during that period, all of which were for 6 a.m. starts and all of which I was sure to ring at 3 a.m. Hey, that's what the rule said. OP, I don't see a problem with continuing to call them that early in the morning. I mean, what are the chances they're gonna check their email while they're sleeping? You really want them to get that notice right away so that they can deal with it and get somebody else to cover your spot, right? Because they can totally do that at 3 a.m. Anyway, keep it up. Our next story today comes to us from Foldy Folds. Don't fix an important tool for our customer? Okay, let's jump right in. Backstory. I made the poor decision of getting a BS in mathematics and was not able to get a job upon graduation because everyone was looking for either a computer scientist or engineer. My buddy managed to hook me up with a job at a federal contractor in business management, specifically contracts. It worked out better than expected because they had many processes that could be automated and needed systems for data tracking, so I spent most of my time making tools in Excel using VBA. One of my assignments was as a liaison to our government customer, and they loved the tracker tools I made for them and the technical support I provided. We had a tool for pricing that was built in Excel and used macros. The coder was about to retire, so the pricing manager got my boss's permission to have me trained to take over as the coder. Apparently, higher up the chain, it was decided that they couldn't have a contracts person doing a pricing job, and that pricing tools group needed to take over. They made it very clear that my help and input were not welcome, and that I was to stay in my lane. The manager of the tools group made a big show of how much more expertise they have than a person in contracts. The only coder they had did Access and not Excel, so she was taking time to get familiar with the tool. I was told that I was not allowed to touch or make any changes to the tool. Now, I knew that there was an issue with the tool and I knew how to fix it. It was an ActiveX issue that I had run into with some of my other tools, including the tracker our customer used. I fixed the issue for them on the tracker. The customer also had a version of our pricing tool, so now the customer has a tool that doesn't work because of an issue they have seen me solve before. So who do they call? Cue MaliciousCompliance. I politely told them that the pricing group was taking over the tool, and I was told to stand down. Then I went for a long lunch. I returned from lunch to utter chaos. The customer had sent the pricing manager and her director a very strongly worded email explaining that they don't give a crap about our internal politics. They have an issue. The pricing group can't fix it, and I can. They demanded I be sent to fix the issue immediately, or complaints would be sent to a higher level. Complaints from the customer are taken extremely seriously, so this would be very detrimental to the pricing manager's career. I also had a frantic voicemail from the developer who was tasked by the pricing tool group with fixing the tool. She was having trouble fixing the issue. My manager gave me the go-ahead to see the customer. I was able to quickly fix the issue and make the customer happy again. A few months later, I was contacted by the pricing manager offering me a job, but I turned it down. I did eventually end up transferring to a systems engineering role, and from there to my current job as a database application developer, which I love. I don't know about you guys, but I think the best part of this story was when they took that match and lit a fire underneath the higher-ups' butts, but then promptly left for lunch. I absolutely loved that. Check out all 3 OPs linked in the description down below. I thank you for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day, and we'll see you tomorrow.